So how much code is now written by AI, and what exactly does written by AI mean? Well, let's dig into that a bit in this video and find out what's the reality behind the rise of AI generated code. So these days, it's hard to find a developer who isn't using some form of AI assistant. Most developers are now using tools where AI is becoming increasingly integrated into all parts of the developer workflow. Others, likely unskilled, are supposedly vibe coding professionally, with some reports suggesting that over 40% of code is now written by AI, and others going as far as 90%. It is clear which direction the trend is headed. Microsoft CTO Kevin Scott predicts that 95% will be written by AI. Let's have a quick listen to what he said.
When we look forward 5 years, what percent of net new code do you think will be AI created versus human created?
95% is going to be AI generated. I think very little is going to be line by line is going to be human written code. Now, that doesn't mean that the AI is doing the software engineering job. And so I think the more important and interesting part of authorship is still going to be entirely human.
This article from February, so already some months old, mentions that AI now generates 41% of all code, with 256 billion lines written in 2024 alone. That figure is also mentioned in this article, citing Stability AI CEO Imad Mustaq. He echoes the fact that this trend is accelerating. Meanwhile, Google CEO confirmed that over 25% of code is already AI generated. And it's not just how much is generated, it's how developers are using it. According to GitHub and Accenture's research, 85% of developers feel confident using GitHub's Copilot, and a staggering 95% said that they actually enjoy coding more. So that's not trivial. Happy developers are more productive developers, and it's sticky. 67% of developers are using Copilot at least 5 days a week, which is therefore not a novelty and is becoming pretty foundational. They also cite Gartner G2 Research Hub with the prediction that soon most code will be written by AI, but reviewed by expensive developers. But soon is vague, and most could mean as little as 51%. Over 50,000 organizations have adopted Copilot. Add Cursor, Claude, and other players to the mix, and we're looking at widespread industry adoption. Now, there's an interesting distinction between AI generated vs AI assisted. In this Reddit thread, users debate whether AI is generating entire blocks of code or just assisting. It references a Paul Graham tweet that AI is involved in somewhere between 40 and 90% of the process, depending on the user's experience level. That raises a good point about how much of the AI generated code actually stays in the final product. GitHub thinks that developers accept about 30% of Copilot suggestions, but 90% admit that they've committed AI suggested code. This article introduces the idea of AI infused code. I particularly like that term. Code that may be edited or built upon but originated with AI feels quite accurate, to the point where in many cases it will be difficult to distinguish parts generated from parts edited. So no doubt by now you've heard the term vibe coding. It's basically where you code by prompting an LLM or chat interface to an LLM, like ChatGPT or Claude. The term was, of course, introduced by Andrej Karpathy, one of the co-founders of OpenAI. Now, if you have tried this, you will likely know that you get some impressive functionality working quickly, and then you ask for a small tweak and it rewrites much of the original code, leading to a lot of chaos and frustration. Now, there may be some prompting ways around this, but of course there are many online jokes about the results of vibe coding. But I have noticed personally that a lot of the tools are getting better at not breaking existing functionality. But AI coding in the hands of skilled professionals is a different thing altogether. Ever since I first started using these tools, I always thought of them as code completion on steroids, and I still think that. But more than this, it is the ability to get answers quickly, which means a lot less time spent getting into arguments on Stack Overflow. The CEO of Shopify has asked teams to consider if AI can help with the task before recruiting. He seems to be asking as an interesting discussion point, but it seems a bit naive given that, at least in my experience, you need a certain amount of time and knowledge to be able to even prompt, review answers, and make use of the output. This requires expensive resource, and you could end up with a bunch of managers of low-skilled techies running prompt, fail, and repeat, review answers, and make use of the output. Interesting to note that in 2023, Shopify laid off 20% of its workforce, which is no small dent, so maybe they are clutching at something here that they hope would help to keep the headcount down. So what do you think? If you're running a company, is this something that you might put to your HR team? Now, coming back to the Copilot study with Accenture, the study suggests that it made 85% of developers feel more confident. That's a very high score indeed, meaning that AI tools are really valued by those developers, a sign that adoption is likely to grow. GitHub and others have offerings for enterprise, which is often a blocker for new technologies until they are deemed safe enough. Now, this bit of research from Codo has some interesting results. 65% of developers surveyed were using AI for refactoring, something which typically developers can spend a significant amount of time doing. Now, generating code can be of different types. If you need a bunch of tests to get confidence, instead of hand generating variations, you can simply have the AI generate those variations and run them against your code. But how do you know that you have not introduced a performance issue if your tests are not comprehensive? So we're not really at the point where it's safe to be unskilled. If anything, you might need to be more skilled to spot the subtle problems that AI might introduce. Now let's have a quick listen to the CEO of Anthropic, who makes some bold predictions.
If I look at coding, programming, which is one area where AI is making the most progress, what we are finding is we are not far from a world, I think we'll be there in 3 to 6 months, where AI is writing 90% of the code. And then in 12 months, we may be in a world where AI is writing essentially all of the code. But the programmer still needs to specify, what are the conditions of what you're doing? What is the overall app you're trying to make? What's the overall design decision? How do we collaborate with other code that's been written? How do we have some common sense on whether this is a secure design or an insecure design? So as long as there are these small pieces that a human programmer needs to do that the AI isn't good at, I think human productivity will actually be enhanced.
So let's have a look at some of the risks that can arise from an increase in AI-generated code. So risk number one is the loss of understanding. There are obvious risks around the introduction of bugs that perhaps the coder doesn't really understand. One possible danger here is that a user who relies heavily on AI could end up losing the ability to understand their own code base. That's where the real risk creeps in. The more you rely on AI, the fuzzier your mental map of the system becomes. You stop internalizing how the parts fit together. Instead, you're operating inside scaffolding that you didn't build. And when something breaks, you're not sure which beam to pull without the whole thing collapsing. The lack of comprehension can pose serious risk when fixes are needed, but AI is just not producing the right result. Most of the time, when I've joined a really complex project, after a while you can start to work quite fast because you know your way around that particular code base and its quirks. The more code is generated by AI, it is possible that developers essentially become completely reliant on those AI tools. And if it won't generate satisfactory results, it could take a very long time to unpick a complex problem. You could argue, therefore, that the design of the application, design principles, whether we're talking about solid or other coding patterns, become even more critical in this AI world to prevent code chaos or incomprehensible code bases. In my experience, getting up to speed on a complex code base takes time. You slowly start to recognize the quirks, the naming conventions, the hidden dependencies, the weird little edge cases that make the system work. AI can fast forward past that messy orientation phase, but it can also skip the understanding that makes you effective later. And when the AI hits a wall, you're stuck debugging a structure you don't recognize, trying to fix logic you never truly grasp. That's why design matters. Principles like solid, dry, test-first development are always going to be your safety net in a world where AI helps write the code. Good architecture and consistent design patterns are the only things preventing the chaos when the machine can't fix its own mess. All right, so risk number two, what about security bugs? Well, when using code generated by AI, it may contain bugs, including security vulnerabilities, and one could counter this with the fact that developer-written code could also contain vulnerabilities, and to some extent, this risk can be mitigated by the use of security verification tools like SNCC, but automated scans aren't a replacement for human judgment. The bottom line, AI writes code fast, but it's still in the early stages of what safe actually means. Risk 3, skill erosion is the silent killer. Now here is a very real danger. We as developers stop learning. If you're early in your career and spending your days rubber stamping AI output, you're skipping the really difficult parts, the stuff that actually makes you better, like hours lost in a debugger or late night, what the hell is this bug, breakthroughs. No scars from sending something broken and fixing it under pressure. That's how you become a true developer, not by letting AI do the thinking for you. Doing the work forces you to learn and grow. There are cases where if you haven't been there, you may not even know what to prompt the AI for. The counter to this argument being that AI could hold your hand and teach you, like having your own personal tutor, but to me that sounds quite long and drawn out and painful. Now, in terms of where things are headed, we can of course see that these tools are already incredibly useful, but it is the trend line that is more interesting. We can see huge resources going into intelligent code editors and coding assistants. This article from the Financial Times talks about AI coding-driven assistants pulling in almost $1 billion of funding, and this article is already 11 months old. So let's talk about the reality of professional programming. Perhaps most AI development today happens right inside the IDE or the integrated development environment. The tools we talked about before, like Copilot and Code Whisperer and Cursor AI, offer autocomplete and inline recommendations, while built-in chat can provide real-time help without switching the context. For deeper problems, developers can pull in tools like ChatGPT or Claude and run them in parallel with their workflow. But there is a distinction. There's a new kind of craftsmanship. AI might write the first draft, but professionals are needed to shape the final product and to make sure it fits in the design orientation of the project. You need someone to review, refactor, and integrate snippets into systems that require robust, scalable, and readable development long after the day of shipping. Serious applications demand serious skills. You're not just solving the problem in front of you, you're thinking about the long-term maintainability, design patterns, performance, and how today's quick fix might fit into tomorrow's roadmap. Developers now have access to a fire hose of useful code. They can instantly compare approaches, cherry pick the best ones, and move faster without sacrificing quality in most cases. That opens up more time to focus on the hard stuff, like sound architecture, clean interfaces, meaningful abstractions. AI can also help in supporting roles, having to write unit tests, identify edge cases, catch regressions, suggest performance tweaks. It handles the repetitive grunt work so that developers can spend more time designing better systems rather than generating boilerplate. It isn't automation replacing developers, it's augmentation if done right. The best developers aren't going to be the ones who avoid AI, they're the ones who know how to use it strategically. So what factors contribute to the scale of the amount of code that's being generated by AI? Well, first up is the free tiered tools. A lot of these tools you can access for free. You have the speed of the suggestions, they are incredibly fast. The hype around these tools in the industry and the media and the amount of investment going into it. You have enterprise adoption, which is a big factor that often blocks or slows down new technologies, and you have the desire by corporations to get ahead of their competition. We can of course see that these tools are incredibly useful. Now, the speed of these tools is a major draw. The feedback loop is pretty much instant. For startups and lean teams, it's a dream. They can ship faster and iterate quicker, maybe even skip some of the usual growing pains, which include hiring large numbers of expensive developers. But this isn't just about developers hacking at the margins. Enterprises are really diving in. GitHub's research shows that AI tools improve code quality and morale, accelerating timelines, turning months into weeks and weeks into days. Those organizations under pressure to innovate faster and operate leaner, for them, AI seems to be the magic bullet. The only problem is that your competition also has access to the same magic bullet. And let's not forget that there is serious money behind a lot of these AI tools, with some of the revenue models still not 100% clear. Also keep in mind that there's a brewing price war with tools like Cursor and Windsurf undercutting each other. Suddenly assistants aren't just powerful, they're becoming quite cheap too. The result is a perfect storm of better tools, lower barriers, enterprise pressure, and massive upside. We're watching quite a large shift, but even greater in the middle of an acceleration. So what are some of the implications? Well, one is language selection. It means that discussions around the popularity of a particular programming language become slightly less significant. Most mainstream programming languages can be used to build most things, and indeed they are. A lot of the selection, once you have selected for ecosystem, come down to the preferences of the programming leads. But in a world where most of the code is written by AI, and even some of the code you leaned on libraries for can be generated quickly, does the choice of programming language really matter quite so much? I think that they still do, but maybe less so. You have bugs and risks. What about unexpected bugs because of poorly specified prompts, poor code generation, performance issues hidden within the code? And we've already talked about the risk of bugs and a de-skilled workforce. Now, we already looked at the Financial Times article that mentioned $1 billion of funding has gone into AI coding assistance, and that article was already 11 months old. It does really seem like an area that's well suited to disruption by AI, and given the cost of software development, there are strong economic incentives to make an impact here. The only downside being quite how competitive it is. I already made a video looking at how competitive this space is with the amount of tools entering the space. Check it out if you're interested, and I will include a link to that in the description. So in conclusion, we don't really have accurate and current data around exactly how much code is being written by AI or in fact infused by AI. Based on everything that we've seen here, and if I were to take a rough stab at it, I would say in the region of around 70% of code. This is to cater for code completions as well as AI chatbot suggestions. Even code that is modified after being produced by an AI still counts. All right, as always, let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you do not want to be the last to know about important AI, tech, and programming news, be sure to hit subscribe. Thank you for watching.